Finesse fishing versus power fishing. This is a common choice that a lot of anglers make when they go to the lake, and it isn't as easy as it might sound. A lot of anglers will make their choice to fish a power bait versus a finesse bait based on the size of fish they want to catch or the number of fish. In general, when you throw a finessier bait, you're going to get more bites, but maybe not the same quality of fish as you would on a power bait. But with a power bait like a jig, you're not going to get as many bites, but the fish size will be bigger. That's usually the general trade-off. But I actually like to take a little bit different approach when I think about fishing a finesse bait versus a power bait. In this situation, I'm just kind of comparing this core tackle Ozark rig paired with a Magnum hitworm compared to a 3/4 ounce football jig with a striking rage craw. These are kind of my 1-2 punch when I'm fishing around brush piles, rock piles, and things in the summertime, and I want a more power fishing approach or a finesse fishing approach. This Ozark rig is actually kind of like a shaky head replacement for me, so if you throw a shaky head, it's basically the same thing. And the idea that I have about fishing baits like this is that usually I'm going to be able to catch the same fish on the shaky head as I do on the big jig, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 bigger bites a day. I don't know 100% if I'm going to get the same quality on that shaky head as I will on the football jig, but I don't feel like it's that off. The really main consideration I make when I'm picking between these two baits is how efficient I can cover water. With a 3/4 ounce football jig, I can actually cover water a lot faster. It sinks faster, I can feel the cover and structure better, and I feel like if there is an active, aggressive fish down there, it's going to eat that football jig right away. I don't feel like I'm giving up a ton of bites, honestly, by throwing a jig when I'm in search mode. By search mode, I mean basically just trying to get out there and cover as much water as I can, fish a bunch of different types of cover, brush piles, rock piles, grass, and getting a sense of if there are fish in an area. However, after I start getting some bites, let's say I catch a fish on the football jig, that's when I go to a more finessey approach like this Ozark rig or like a shaky head, things like that. I find that I can get more bites and coax a few of the more finicky, more pressured fish with that Ozark rig after I find the fish initially with that football jig. And that's kind of been my approach for years now. I start with those more power-oriented baits and then pick up the finesse baits as almost like a cleanup to pick off more fish in the area. Now this is based on my strategy of trying to find schools of fish in the summer or areas that are holding multiple fish. So if you're going down the bank and things like that, fishing boat docks and kind of targeting isolated individual fish, then you may be able to have equal success on both of these style of baits, because really any bait you put by those fish a lot of times will generate a bite, and you're really just trying to cover as much water as possible. So going to a power bait like a jig is probably going to be your best option, because you can, again, cover more water quickly and still pretty much get the same number of bites. But if you're on a lake where you're fishing around larger groups of fish, or there's a stretch that might have 15 or 20 fish down the bank, you may be able to catch 10 fish on the shaky head and only 5 on the jig. But you can probably catch at least a couple of those fish you were going to catch on the jig to start, let's say 2 of the 10 on the jig, then switch over to that shaky head and start putting more numbers in the boat. It's kind of this strategy of basically locating them with the power bait, maybe getting a couple big bites with it to start, then again, cleaning up with that shaky head. This works with a lot of different baits, whether that is a bigger crankbait and then switching to a smaller swim bait, maybe throwing a big mag draft style swim bait or a spinner bait and then switching to a little shaky head or a little smaller square bill. There's a lot of 1-2 punches that you probably have found that are effective for you. This is just one of the combinations I try, but it's definitely something that has helped me catch a lot more fish over the years, because instead of getting dialed into just one of these 2 baits, I utilize them both to increase my efficiency again with that bigger jig and maybe increase my fish size a little bit, and then clean up with that finessey rig. Now, if I was fishing in a tournament and I was basically only trying to catch big fish and I felt like I could generate enough bites with the jig, I might just keep that jig in hand all day. If I'm getting 10 to 15 bites on the jig, that's plenty of bites for me to get a 5 bass limit that weighs, 15 to 20 pounds. But there are a lot of days when I can only generate maybe 5 bites a day on that jig. And that's a really slim margin for error. If you miss a fish, you break off, you just don't pay attention and you don't realize he's on and set the hook late. There's all these things that can happen. And so if you're on a bite where you're only getting 5-6 bites a day on the big jig, that's when the shaky head comes into play, or any other finessey bait. You basically can try to maybe catch 3 of your fish on the jig and then maybe 6 or 7 more fish on the shaky head, and increase your margin for error in a tournament so that way you're getting 10 to 12 bites a day versus 5 bites a day. All of these strategies are things you kind of have to weigh the odds on the lakes you're fishing, the strategies you want to go after. If you want to go win a tournament, for example, maybe just sticking with the jig and going for those 5 bites is the better strategy, because if you do catch them all, you're probably winning the tournament, versus if you have to lay up and go with a finesse rig, you still might get a top 10, which is really good, but you may not have that top end potential. On the flip side, if you went and threw the finesse bait all day and got a ton of bites, maybe you're only giving yourself the maximum potential of a top 10 if everything goes right and you get around the right fish, but you may also be sacrificing some fish size and your average finish might be 20th, 30th, or 40th, depending on how big your tournament is. So you kind of have to, again, weigh those odds as well. And that's why I like to kind of pair both of these together and try them both throughout a fishing day. I'll always have one spinning rod on the deck of the boat, despite my disdain for spinning rods. I don't like throwing them that much, but I always have at least one on the deck with some type of backup bait, just to try to put a few extra fish in the boat usually, just because fishing's hard enough as it is, and a lot of times I don't like to make it harder on myself by just throwing these big baits, but it really can be a great approach depending on what your goals are for a fishing day. So hopefully this information is going to help you make a better decision on your finesse versus your power baits, giving you some food for thought, at least what I think about when I'm making this decision. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel for more content like this.